Alright, this week we have 4 movies, 3 out of 4 of which are sequels, so there's that. And then one, I guess you could call it experimental movie thrown in there as well. We did get Battle of the Sexes this week, but for other circumstances I'm going to have to see it next week, so it'll be on the next video with The Foreigner and whatever else there is. So until then, we're going to start here with Blade Runner 2049, which is yet another one of those sequels to where we weren't quite sure if we wanted it or not. And then as news started coming out about what was going to go into it, like we got Harrison Ford back, Deakins was going to shoot it. I think the thing that kind of reassured people just instantly, and everybody thought it was going to be okay, was the hiring of Villeneuve as the director. So, and that Gosling was going to star as well and be our new main character, and adding people like Batista and stuff like that. So it started to look very positive, and then obviously it seems to have grown into a lot more than what people were expecting. The one thing I do like the most immediately about this is that you'll notice with the way the future was portrayed, like 2019 was portrayed in 1982, and how obviously things are different and we're only 2 years away from that year now. And it's like this movie could have taken like a lot of liberties with the setting, especially with where we've gotten ourselves now in regards to what 2049 would look like. But I like the whole idea that they really didn't seem to use that at all. It was pretty much all just, they took that world and this is just what that world looks like 30 years later. They still have the Atari thing, they still have the Pan Am thing, and everything, but it does at the same time look like it's kind of, I don't know if evolved is the right word over the past 30 years, but there's certainly been some changes, but there are those little details in there where you can tell it's supposed to be the same city. So I did like the way they did that without taking advantage too much that this was made in the year 2017. So, and just what this, obviously the first thing you want to talk about is what this movie looks like. I've had to mention this many times before, but if for some reason you happen to come across this and have never heard me speak before, for the past 3 or 4 years I've been avoiding trailers entirely. Like when I'm in the theater, I'll just close my eyes or look to the ground, and the same thing for TV spots too. I'll see the occasional still, but that's about it. So everything in this movie, in the context of the movie, I was seeing it for the first time how it looked. And I would not, it was kind of going back to how I felt about The Revenant, where it's like everybody was building up what it looked like, and it's just like you kind of can only imagine so far, and then when you actually see it after your mind has built it up, you think, well, it's probably been overblown and it'll be fine. But no, the appearance of this movie is pretty much everything you would want it to be, and very much you can tell that Villeneuve style is in there, and just the crazy, unthinkable shit that Deakins can pull off. One thing I really particularly liked was the way they use silhouettes. Not just in, like, the moments where it's actually a dark room, like Leto's introduction, but many scenes where we get, like, the whole background of the scene, and Gosling just kind of looks like a silhouette in front of it, regardless of how well lit the scene is. And I think stuff like that really works well. Then there's stuff where, this is credit to both Deakins and Villeneuve, where it's like, there's obviously going to have to be exposition because things are so complex in this world now, and we have to kind of know exactly where we're going or what we're looking at. And so whenever they have exposition, it's still, there's always those moments where you just kind of have to wait while the movie educates you so you know what the fuck is going on. But this movie is able to do to where even the exposition scenes are still really interesting just because of how they look. Like the scene where Robin Wright is talking to him, and you think it could just be, this in another movie probably would have just been 2 people talking in a room, and it's like we would have just had to deal with that until the next great scene. But we have this shot through the rainy window that just makes it look really, the whole visual is appealing regardless of what's happening in the scene, regardless of how mundane the content of the actual scene is. It's the way he shows it that makes everything kind of pop out no matter what's going on. So, which is something he's been capable of in most of his movies, as you've seen. And the score as well. Obviously, this is probably the most apparent score we've had in quite some time, to where it's, I mean, we've heard about surround sound, like, forever, but I mean, it's hardly the case with scores, usually. Like, maybe the most you can say, like, the first example that would jump out to me would be the Dark Knight movies, to where you kind of feel like the score is just completely around you, like you're engulfed by the score itself, let alone the visuals that accompany it. But I mean, I think this is on a more grand level than even that. This score might as well be, this is a cliche, but this score might as well be another character with how apparent it is. And there are times, like, maybe the Vegas scene, I felt like maybe it was a little too much, but for the most part, it definitely gets the desired effect out of it, with just how booming and loud and just the whole thing is. So I do, and if you have, so hopefully your theater has a grand sound system. Otherwise, I'm not sure how that'll play out, because I know there are other kind of smaller theaters around there whose sound systems are quite shitty. And so, kind of like the way our theater used to be. But God, that really, really enhances kind of being engulfed by the world itself, without the visuals having to do all the work. Like, it's amazing how much work the score does. Usually the score is there just to be like, oh, we're just adding a little something here, but I mean, it's like half of the scene is just what you hear. And it's sometimes you can't even tell if it's the score or if it's just sounds in the scene. So it's kind of fun to try to differentiate that. And obviously, talking more about the appearance, obviously looking at the world and all that is great. And then you think about the original movie, and you see, like, whenever you think about the visuals in the original movie or the sets, you're generally thinking about the exteriors. Well, this movie goes completely all in on the interiors as well. Most specifically, the Wallace building. Every single damn room of the Wallace building is like this massive, massive thing. And the way how it has, like, that look of the water reflecting and all that stuff. Leto's little place where everything is surrounded by water, which seems like a dangerous place for a blind guy to be, but that's just where he resides. And you'll notice about that is, yeah, just how, what I wanted to bring up was the whole idea that I don't know if this was ever disproven. I never really heard, I tried not to look too much into anything going in. But I had heard that supposed statement that there was no green screen used at all. If that's the case, that is too impressive for words. But I must say, I do find that a little hard to believe. I'm wondering exactly how... I'd like to look into more details on that now that I've seen the movie and can just delve into everything about it. But I mean, if... the production design Oscars should pretty much be handed to them already if there was no green screen used in this movie, but I guess that'll remain to be seen for me. We've also added a bunch of new characters besides Gosling. And we have, Batista was built up a lot for his limited screen time. I did also check out the 3 shorts prior to this. 2022, 2036, and 2048, I think. And that 2048 was Batista, where we got a little bit of what he was doing. We get a lot more of his character in that short than we do here. But seeing that short does enhance his character a lot and where it's coming from, and the way he's, like, criticized later, to where they just see him like the hulking figure that he is, and somebody that works with Gosling says he doesn't seem like, you know, the type that would you know, talk or reason or whatever, and it's like, you do get that vibe when in the short, so it's kind of like so if you saw the short, you get that sense in the movie that this is a guy that is kind of looked at in the wrong way by most people. So I thought that was nicely done putting it in, but I wonder how much his whole character will be hindered if people didn't look into that. So, and that's the same for Leto's introduction as well, because Leto Leto just keeps on doing it. We were talking about how his screen time was so incredibly limited despite all of his exposure for Suicide Squad. Well, he's built up as the main villain of this movie. He made the poster, 2 scenes. However, in his defense, they are 2 very, very crucial scenes, very long scenes, and very good scenes. So he has that going for him. And we get a lot of the, he's like a much more interesting version of Tyrell from the original movie. Obviously, we learned in the anime short exactly how we got from how Tyrell is no more to when Wallace kind of takes over here. So in a sense, he's the same character, but he's definitely got different motives and a different outlook, and just in general comes off as a much more interesting person and has much more interesting scenes than Tyrell did in the original, so there's that. As far as Gosling's character, obviously, it does seem like it's one of those things where I can't tell if it's Gosling just kind of doing what we've always seen him do before, or if it's a case of perfect casting. You could say boring casting, but I think it's much closer to perfect casting. Because he's obviously very much a loner, except for Joy, his hologram companion. That's something else they really went all out with, was the the Wallace products are really cool to see throughout the movie, and exactly how they work. There's a lot of creativity put into that. And yeah, he is the character where, like, you know, he seems like a strong silent type, but then he'll get aggressively violent if need be. You know, like Drive or something. Maybe a little bit of A Place Beyond the Pines. But he still does play that perfectly, and makes a character that is so engaging, I swear to God. He and all these new characters are engaging enough to the point that once again, maybe this is from ignoring all the marketing and stuff like that, even though he's like blatantly on the poster and his name is right there next to Gosling's, but it's like, these new characters and this new story is so engaging and all these new visuals, I kept forgetting Harrison Ford was going to be in it. It's like, when they actually name-dropped Deckard, I was like, oh, yeah, and then it's like, oh, wait, he's in this. Never mind. That's not some inside thing at all. He's totally in this. It does take him a long time to show up. It's probably almost 2 hours in. The movie is like 2:45 in total. It's long. It's very long. That was a concern to me going in. And yeah, it does. Now, I praise all that stuff. This movie does have problems. Starting with that, it does feel its length. I mean, it's great. It really pulls you in. It's really engaging. But I mean, yeah, after a while, it does. When you start to think back to other scenes and you see, you know, the different directions it's gonna go, it starts to feel its length after a while, especially, which sucks because pretty much when Deckard comes into the picture is about the time it started to feel how long it was. But they did keep it going, and it was fine, and there weren't too many spots to where it felt like it kind of, you know, dragged down a little bit. But then there's also stuff you have to, oh shit, there is a new character I totally forgot to mention. The person that, I guess technically Leto's our main antagonist, but really our main antagonist of the movie is a woman called Love. This is a woman that works for Leto and basically has to go out and do all the dirty work. And this is the kind of character that, for real, in an actual scene, is causing bombs to drop on people, and they're blowing people up left and right, simultaneously while she's getting a manicure. And she's just, and it's not, I say that, it kind of sounds like one of those, oh, they're trying to play up that, oh, it's a woman, so this is totally different. But, no, it's just, the character does blend in with all the other kind of hardcore badasses we've seen in this world before, and these types of worlds before. and she's a really great kind of unstoppable antagonist. So that was really cool to put in this, especially if you were only going to give our main antagonist a couple of scenes. So it's it's always the girls that work for Leto that have more screen time than him. So and yeah, another thing that kind of starts to hinder it a little bit is once we get towards the turns in the story. I'm gonna have to dance around this to not go into too much, but we get pretty heavily reliant on coincidences, like very large conveniences. Actually, that kind of starts with Gosling just happens to be in the place where he's going to find the box of bones, and how that goes off from there. But yeah, we do kind of have those moments where it's kind of like, oh, this just happened to go into this, and this character just happened to already be in the story that might link to this. And there's a lot of that, especially towards the end, where it's kind of like, well, I think we've weaved together a little too close here, but overall it's fine. So everything adds up, and everything is great, and we do have a very good product here. I know people are building it up as like one of the best sequels we've seen in a long time, and people were just praising it to the heavens, and it's like, I do think it's very good, but I do think those things bring it down from greatness a little too much, especially the when it starts to feel its length. But there's probably something I should say now that I intentionally didn't say at the beginning of this, because I didn't want to say this at the very start, and then you X out and leave in an angry huff, not wanting to hear the rest of what I had to say. But now that I've pretty much gotten my thoughts of the new Blade Runner out there, let me just say that I know quite a few people, and all those people know about my movie habits. How many I've seen, how passionate I am about them, and I get a lot of questions regarding this about different movies. But there is one question I get from people more than any other question in the history of ever. And that is, why don't you like Blade Runner? Yeah, I don't care for the first movie. I really don't. I've seen it 4 times. I think I saw each cut, not every cut, but the theatrical, the director's cut, the final cut. And then I watched the final cut's the one that I own, and I watched that again last night to prepare for this. So I've seen it 4 times, technically. And the thing about it is, when you see what Villeneuve did, and you see how we really get to bask in this world, like I said, you got the score really helping it out too, and it's like, even though we get these really big moments and these long scenes where we get to see all the different sets, and especially the Vegas scene is really long when he's going through, but like around every new turn is just this monumental image. But the thing about it is, in this movie, even though we do have those parts where it kind of feels like it's slowing down a little, the story feels like it's constantly moving. And we're getting all the visuals on top of that. And we're getting all these colorful characters and stuff like that. And with the first movie, it kind of feels like, the big thing about the first Blade Runner is that it's got 2 things that always horribly contrast and are a huge recipe for disappointment, and that is a great story, a really great story, and a shitty script. It's like, really, I think people kind of leave on a high thinking Blade Runner is really well written, because one of the last things in the movie is Rutger Hauer's Lost in Time monologue, until you remember that monologue is something that Rutger Hauer came up with and is not in the script. So when you take that out of it, what do we have? And the thing about that is, I'm talking about this really great story, and I understand Blade Runner is a world-building movie. I get it. But the thing is that, and I understand, and you can say, like, so much of Blade Runner's runtime is the visuals and the city, and it's like, okay, so sci-fi movie where we're world building, and they show us this by having long exterior shots where we get to bask and everything. What does that remind you of? Most people might say 2001. That's true. But there is another movie where you could say the same thing about it, and it's like, you compare it to Blade Runner. I'm thinking more Star Trek the Motion Picture. with all the really long, overdone shots we get of, yes, this is our world, we get it now. And because of this, it kind of feels like we have a really great story here, but then the whole movie feels like about 10% of that. Like 10% of the movie is that great story, and everything else is. I feel like I understand what it does for Deckard's character and how he views the replicants, and you can go into that whole thing. I know there's a lot of themes in there. I get it, but the themes don't necessarily. You can acknowledge them, but for me, they don't particularly resonate. And we spend a whole lot of stuff on the Rachel stuff, and I know the whole having her be the ambiguous woman and she's behind the puff of smoke. It's like, yes, they're really, really going for the noir thing. I get it. I do. But it just doesn't add up. There's just not enough of the good parts in it. They're in there. They're in there for sure, but they feel like such a small percentage of the movie. And every time I watch it, it kind of becomes a chore. It kind of becomes a chore until Rutger Hauer comes into it. And then we get somewhere. But in the meantime, it's just, I've never cared for that movie, all 4 times I've seen it. I think the director's cut is the one that... The one time I remember watching it and thinking, okay, maybe it's a little better than I thought. But then rewatching the final cut last night was just... It all was coming back to me. It's like, this is why I don't care for this. So, I was really, really worried about going into 2049. I was tossing and turning in bed last night thinking, oh my god, I feel like I'm not going to like it. I really don't think I'm going to. But I was very pleasantly surprised. I do much prefer this to the original, and I know a lot of the passion for this movie will come from those moments that are in direct relation to the first movie, and where that kind of passion for the original movie is going to come through into this one. It's going to really hit hard for the fans in a big way, and I imagine those are the people. And the people that love Blade Runner is about 90% of the population. So I understand that this movie is going to be hugely beloved, but as somebody who just does not like the first movie, I think this is very good and definitely a step up, but it still kind of hinders itself from getting into that greatness category. So I hope that doesn't make you too angry, but that's the way it goes. So yes, I do like this a lot. I did think, honestly, I thought it might be best of the year territory, but then the more it went, it felt like it started to kind of drag itself down. So but I still think highly of it. So there's that. Alright, our next sequel is going to be Cult of Chucky. I was really dismayed by the announcement of this movie. Owen actually told me about it before I even found out. And I was upset because, I mean, I know Mancini has written every single one of the movies, and he wrote and directed Seed, and we know how that went. But then he did Curse, and he brought it back to kind of its dark territory. And the thing about it was that I thought Curse had the perfect ending. When he's mailed off and he ends up on Andy's doorstep, Tiffany has mailed him, and they're gonna tie up that loose end. And then he opens it, and Andy's fucking waiting for him, and supposedly blows his head off. And that's it. And I was like, that's it. That's perfect. You brought everything full circle. You brought it back to the movie's original dark nature. You brought everything back, and then you just capped it off perfectly with that final moment where you brought back Alex Vincent to blow Chucky's head off. You cannot go anywhere else. Well, they found a way, and that is the fact, for starters, he didn't quite kill Chucky. I do like this. This gave me hope. This opening where we learned that he now has just Chucky's head, and Chucky is still alive even though half his head's been blown off, and he's keeping him alive to just torture him. He keeps him in a safe behind his military academy sweatshirt, and just tortures him for everything he's done, and it's great. But then we shift, and we go back to our main character from Curse, who was played by Brad Dourif's daughter. And she's now in this, now it's Halloween 2. Now it's pretty much the whole thing is in this hospital. and we end up finding ways to bring him back. Now, we start off and we've got another Chucky doll. I do like the little joke thrown in with, they ask, where did that come from? And he's like, oh, I got it from Hot Topic. That's kind of funny. So, and then we're kind of going back and forth between what Andy's doing and how she's handling it in this hospital when Chucky has supposedly returned. And there's like multiple Chucky dolls laying around this one. It's like, which one's the one? As we get to know the patients and all their different things, and we introduce all these different characters. So, there's not a whole lot of strength in these new characters, but the thing about it is the directions this is going to go, like what they can do, and what tone we're going to have. And there are moments where, there are some very tense moments occasionally. One that stands out is, it probably sounds cheap, but it actually does work when you see it. The moment when the Chucky doll that we know is probably him is taken into a room by himself and he's sat down and then the person leaves. And then it's just Chucky sitting in this room alone. And the camera lingers on him for what feels like an eternity. And we're just waiting for him to move. I thought that was really well done and a really nice use of tension with how long the stretch was before his eyes moved. But then we get into something. You might be confused by this point after what I said. I'll get there in a second. So then but obviously there's also a lot of cheap shit too. Very straight-to-video jump scares. Like, for instance, when we meet a guy that supposedly has multiple personality disorder, when she first meets him, it makes the jump scare noise, and he comes from out of nowhere. But the thing is that these are people standing around a room, right? But when they make the jump scare noise, this guy looks like he rises from the ground. It's like, that's dumb and not effective. But there's not too... I mean, they do the jump scare thing stupidly many times, never to the desired effect. But not enough to where it gets too annoying. And then there's stuff like the vision of the giant Chucky. To where it's like, I'll bet anything that looked better on paper. Like, it's kind of like you think back to the projector scene in It. It's like, that might have been what they were going for, but this looks ridiculous how they did it. Because they had that straight-to-video budget, you understand. But I do like some... I didn't mind some of the callbacks, like the military school sweatshirt. There is a death in the movie that seems to, has the same feel as when Tiffany killed the newlyweds in Bride. There's one in particular that I think would have been dumb, but at the same time I kind of give it props to, because we live in this world now to where it's like, you look at, like, say, the X-Men movies, or a number of horror franchises or whatever, to where it's like, people seem desperate to want to kind of, if there's something that people didn't like in a franchise, somebody will come out and say, oh, we're going to continue the franchise, but we're going to lop all that stuff out of canon because that's what the fans want. But he's going to stick to what he's put in his canon. So even though we've come back around and we're back in serious territory, at least that's where Curse got us. There is a moment in this movie when Jennifer Tilly is reintroduced. Obviously she's Tiffany now. But then it's like, she says, you know, weirdly enough, you look exactly like Jennifer Tilly. And it's like, at first you say, that's fucking stupid. But then you remember, it's like, well, this is still in the world of Seed of Chucky. Whether we liked what happened in Seed of Chucky or not, it's still canon at this point. So it's like, in that movie, Jennifer Tilly was a real person in the story that Tiffany possessed, and now is in the body of. And so, yeah, since Jennifer Tilly, the person, exists in this world, yeah, it makes perfect sense she would say that. So, I'm okay with that. And then there's some stuff that's kind of reference heavy, kind of like, maybe this isn't on purpose, maybe it's just how it was written, but I'm gonna refuse to believe that. Because Chucky's walking around, as we know, as always, Chucky has been voiced by Brad Dourif. So he's walking around this mental institution, and he runs into somebody, and they have a conversation, and she's under the impression that he's just there, and she doesn't care. And so he turns away, and his response to this is, fucking cuckoo's nest. It's like, yes, Brad Dourif, you were in that movie. Congratulations for pointing that out and remembering. That got you an Oscar nomination, my friend, and look at you now. No, I do very much appreciate Brad Dourif's commitment to this character, for sure. And there's even a moment later where somebody slits their wrist, and it's like, is that a reference to Brad Dourif and Cuckoo's Nest as well? It could be, because it was still in the mental institution. Okay. All this aside now, I'm talking about, if you haven't watched it yet, you're probably wondering how I talked about the Andy stuff at the beginning with the torturing Chucky, the doll he got at the end of Curse, and we got this other Chucky doll running around in full form. For a long time, I thought we were dealing with a fractured timeline. And I was like, I'm curious to see how this ties together and how we get from this to this. Well, it's not a fractured timeline. Chucky informs us he went to, what was it, voodooforDummies.com? Or whatever it was, and just before the events of, I'm not sure, Curse, maybe? He found out how to possess multiple Chucky dolls at the same time. And that's what we're dealing with now. So now it's not just that Chucky is the severed head that Andy keeps as a prize, nor is it just the Chucky doll we've seen been running around. We end up with like 4 of them. And they all got Charles Lee Ray in them. They don't really explain the basics of this other than I read about it on the internet, says Chucky. So it starts to feel like this is Child's Play 7 now. And it's like, I feel like we're already in Jason Goes to Hell territory. It's like, it took Friday the 13th 9 tries to get to Jason Goes to Hell territory. Like, if Creighton Duke starts coming after Chucky, I think we've hit rock bottom. But, and it does provide us with stuff, like, I guess it's, like, considered one of the series' money shots, like, of the whole series, to see 3 Chucky dolls working together to kill one dude. And I get that. Fine. It's a cool image for people who are fans of the series, I guess. Because it's kind of something that you never really thought you'd see, but is so kind of overwhelming in its nature, I guess. But at the same time, we watch the Chucky dolls interact, and it feels more like the worm guys from Men in Black. And then it's like, okay, so he brought us back with Curse, but then this one seems to find a middle ground between Curse and Seed. I'm really just not fucking sure where we are anymore. And the thing about it is you look at this kind of straight-to-video quality here, and you realize that, we realize a problem here, and I guess a problem that kind of Curse had too, but we could still kind of appreciate because of how they pulled it off, but it's like, these movies belong in a certain era. You can tell when you look at how polished this movie looks, and it looks like a movie released in 2017, and it's like, these movies don't really work in this era. Like, that's definitely a late 80s, early 90s thing, and that's when these movies were really at their peak. I don't know, I still like Bride a lot, even being in the late 90s when we were starting to go into the whole meta thing, the post-Scream thing. But it's like, I feel like this movie may have looked better if we had more of an 80s, 90s aesthetic. Kind of like what Mike Flanagan did with Ouija Origin of Evil, to where he kind of made it look like an old movie on a projector in post-production. I feel like if you kind of maybe dirtied this movie's image a little bit and made it look more like it was maybe 20 years older than it actually is, then it might look a little more okay. It might look a little more in line with what the material is. But in the meantime, it just looks, the whole thing just looks off this clean. And this new, I guess. So, I don't know. But, it's not, like, bad. It's not, like, it doesn't go into these stupid levels that C did. It doesn't have the Japanese karate bullshit. Doesn't have the Glen or Glenda bullshit. But it's still, like, I'm still not quite sure what tone we're trying to do. And like I said, it just kind of feels off in this, just in this era now. This, like, the franchise is feeling really dated. So that could, and we'll see. Of course, Of course, we're not done yet, judging by this ending. We're not done at all, so we'll see what happens. I will say, much like Curse, there is a very nice post-credit scene involving a face we have not seen in a long time. But to forewarn you, I learned this. I had to go back because I had heard there was one, but then I had to go back because I watched the DVD comes with the regular version and then the unrated version. And it's like, well, the unrated version doesn't usually add anything and maybe drags it down and makes it longer for no reason, so we'll just go with the rated version. And then it just ended, and I realized that the post-credit scene is only on the unrated version. So I guess you have to put up with that in order to get it. So I went back, I went to the unrated version and fast-forwarded through the credits, and it's there. So be sure you do that if you have the option. So, because that's one of the movie's high points, is that we're going into this. So yeah, if they're going to keep going, like I said, at least it didn't end like Cult of Chucky, to where it's like, yes, you can stop now. It's like, if they're going to do another one now, it's like, it's not surprising. So at least they've got that going for them. So whatever. Alright, we're going to go off sequels for a second. And we're going to talk about A Ghost Story. Another movie that A24 has put out in this kind of indie scene with David Lowery, who did Ain't the Body Saints and The New Pete's Dragon, reuniting with Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara, as he did with Ain't the Body Saints, to make this story where a couple is in love, they're together, they live a nice life together, and then Casey Affleck dies in a car accident and comes back as a ghost that is actually him in a white sheet with holes in it. He just watches. It's like it's like Ghost. It's like the movie Ghost, only obviously more like with a more helpless vibe, like a more hopeless vibe to it. To where like Ghost is about him trying to let her know that he's there and kind of change her life for the better, but here he has no choice but to just watch, and that's all he can do. And I kind of like that that's what they do with the white sheet concept, where it's like there's just a blankness for him except for his sight. Like, he doesn't have arms or anything. He can just float. There's nothing he can do. He doesn't have a voice, nothing. So all he can do is just watch this from a distance, hopelessly. And obviously brings that real bleakness to it, which is nice. It's a very, obviously, like I said, it's a very bleak story, but it can also, you can see, it can be very emotional. So, even despite this image that some people may not be able to take seriously. And so you look at this, and you see it from that angle, but then it's also kind of like, I was talking about this with It Comes at Night, where a movie that I loved, and I still consider one of the best of the year, and it's like we were talking about that tweet that A24 sent out, to where we're doing this thing, especially with art house movies, to where it's like, it's almost like people are trying to intentionally divide audiences now, instead of trying to embrace and try to get everybody in on the great stuff. But it's like everybody wants to do this thing now to where it's like the great stuff is for me and smart people and not for dumb people, and it's like that's just where we're headed, unfortunately. So this movie almost seems like an intentional placement in, let's just see how much we can divide audiences. Like, it just exists, bringing this separation, and it's like, let's just really see who's who here. And, like, who can digest this and who's not even gonna try. And yeah, the people who aren't even gonna try, yeah, probably don't deserve a very quality movie that really brings out some real emotion. And you may see that with a title and a concept that may totally intentionally be misleading. Because we saw the backlash from It Comes at Night, to where it's like, they build it up. It Comes at Night is still a freaky-ass movie, but apparently it wasn't the movie people thought it was gonna be. So they're like, okay, let's call a movie a ghost story, let's put a ghost image on it, but make it like this heartbreaking, loss of romance or whatever movie. It's more than that, but we'll go into that. Maybe not for the better. And so it's like, it really almost seems like an experiment on the surface of, like, just how far we can make that line to where we have certain audiences over here and certain over here, and it's a bad thing should these things ever collide because we'd sacrifice quality or something. I don't know. So, and there was, a few months back, like around the time it was first released, there was this article that got posted about a guy that had a horrible experience watching this movie, to where he and his date were there for the emotional experience, and they knew like exactly what to expect, and they saw the movie for what it was and what Larry was trying to do. But the thing here was that the audience around them was not having it because of what it looked like on the surface and what the audience saw, and they just did not take it seriously whatsoever. They were laughing, they were on their phones, they were leaving, they were making noise, all that stuff, just not into it whatsoever. And it's like, yeah, that's a really bad place to be, but apparently it got even worse to the point that this audience was so bad that this dude and his date were here, and there were like two people over here, like one seat over from them, and when it got towards the climax, the guy's date got emotional and started to cry, and these two people over here were taking the movie so not seriously that, like, whispering to each other, they were ridiculing the girl for crying. And it's like, I understand now where it's, I mean, I get it, I've always gotten it to where it's like, there are certain audiences that this just is not for, and they really shouldn't even be anywhere near it, especially if they're going to ridicule somebody for being emotionally moved by it, when that's the movie's purpose in the first place. Having said that, and they do certainly take, you know, certain angles to that to the extreme, this is a 92-minute movie that feels very, very long. This movie's pacing is so deliberately immobile. And there are many, many movies where this has worked. There are so many, dating back any point in time, you'll have an experimental movie to where the camera just lingers on seemingly nothing, and we just watch characters kind of live in the moment, because this is real life that we're looking at. But I mean, this movie does have, like, an intentional tediousness about it. But there's something in this movie is severely lacking that does not give it the impact, for me, of other movies like it. And so, well, the thing here is, let's take the pie scene, for instance. Like, you would think maybe the pie scene is what people would jump to when they talk about the tediousness of it. But there is something to the pie scene, because you heard, first off, it was way overblown. I had heard from everything from 8 minutes to 12 minutes. I think it's about 6. To where it's just Rooney Mara eating an entire pie. Like, after, obviously she's still going through grief, so somebody brings her over a pie, and when she gets home and sees it, she decides she's just going to eat the whole fucking thing in one long unbroken take. She takes a couple of bites before we get to the unbroken take, but still. And we're watching her go through this whole thing, and it's kind of like... So, I guess, obviously I knew about it beforehand, but I guess the initial response typically is, holy shit, are they actually going to show this whole thing? They pretty much do, but then there's the whole thing where we're kind of watching her, and there is, you could say there are those moments in, it's like a staple in indie movies, to have, like, long scenes of people eating in silence. It drives me fucking crazy. But here, it does have a purpose, because obviously we already know her getting the pie in general is involved in her grieving process, but then we actually get to watch her indulge in it. And we do get to see her emotions. She tends to go, like, sometimes she seems like blank and just doing it, but then there's times where she looks like she's about to cry, and then she starts to get angry, and there is a point to it, and it does have a progression. But there are other scenes to where it just kind of feels like long unbroken takes that are just kind of, we've lived enough in the moment to the point, and it keeps going. And it's like we get the point of it long before it cuts away, and that's when you kind of start to lose us with that whole, hey, let's just live in this couple thing. Movies have pulled that off significantly better before, and this one feels like, for a movie that's so built on emotion, like that's the whole starting point, and how we're getting to which points we get to, it feels like that emotion is totally lacking, and it makes everything that's supposed to be these big moments, or these moments where we're just kind of basking in it without it having to do much of anything, they're not there. The feeling isn't there. And that's really unfortunate for a movie like this, when that's kind of seems like its whole purpose. Now, of course, another purpose, obviously, is after I watched it, I read about what exactly Larry was going for with the second half. When we get to the whole... Eventually, Rooney Mara leaves and a new family moves in. We're actually on the second family to the point I'm going to get to, where it's a party is going on. And it's like right in the middle of the movie, Larry had an existential crisis and suddenly wanted to explore that territory from out of fucking nowhere in this hopeless romance movie. And so, apparently, his fears about the unknown after death, and the fact that no matter how... The guy's whole speech about how no matter what we accomplish, eventually we're all going to blink out into nothingness, including the whole world itself, because that's just science. And I don't know if it's the length of this scene that just really drags it out and really beats us over the head with it, and just makes it seem like there is a point here, but you leave it saying, so what? But apparently, this whole existential thing was the basis for Larry writing this script. So, how it fits into what we saw before is not really particularly adding up, and especially when we get to the ending that we do, it's kind of like, it feels like it was just in the middle with no particular purpose. It's like he really, like when you're listening to that guy talk at the party, it's like you can imagine Larry just really, really wanting to write this stuff down because it's in his head. And he's really passionate and emotional about it. But then once he had it written out, it's like he didn't know what to do with it. So it's like, where do I put this in a movie? I have this ghost movie I'm doing. Copy, paste, right in the middle. And that's what we have. So it's really confusing to me to learn that that was his original idea. Like, that's what he was going for. Because that seemed like the afterthought. So, I mean, it's just all kind of confusing what exactly he wanted to accomplish with this. And given how he uses that later in the movie to show us that whole progression thing, and it's like how what that guy was saying eventually adds up. But then it's like, okay, we get it, but what are you trying to say exactly? Except for the fact that that's what happens. Is that it? Because it really felt like you had something really profound here, and then it's just like, nah, I just wanted to get that off my chest. Okay. And then you kind of see where that emotional impact just kind of isn't there. So, I'm not really sure. And then sometimes it seems to like totally contradict itself. There's a moment that I found somewhat interesting when Casey Affleck looks out the window and he sees a ghost in another house. And it's like, so throughout this whole thing, the whole point is that he can't be seen. So it kind of adds that hopelessness and loneliness, and it's like he just has to watch what could have been his life unfold before his eyes, and there's just nothing he can do about it. But then suddenly somebody can see him. It's another ghost. And it's this big moment where it's like, oh my god, I'm seen again, or whatever. They don't really do anything with that. And they do this thing to where the ghosts can communicate, and when they communicate, there's subtitles. And it's like, so the movie seemed like it was going for this whole contemplative thing. Well, the subtitles just go right against that, don't they? Where it's like, this movie really wants to get your mind going and just really wants you to kind of slowly, gradually figure out where it's going and what it's trying to say and all these deep, hidden meanings and all that. But it's like, and then you just have ghosts that talk through subtitles and just say exactly what's going on. And then it's like, okay, that just seems to totally go against everything I've seen up to this point, and we'll see afterwards. Fine. So, and I do understand, like some of the approaches, particularly the visual style, it's very visually appealing. The ambition has to be admired. But then it's just like, and you see stuff like, when we're watching the party, like, before the guy went into his whole thing, it was kind of like, I took it as, oh, I get it. It's like the whole, we're kind of watching like a voyeuristic thing, and we're watching people interact, and then suddenly this guy just kept fucking talking, and then it's like, oh, this is what Lowry wants to say. Whatever. And so I do understand where it's coming from a visual angle and stuff like that, only until it confuses me. And then you talk about the format too. I don't mind the format. I can understand how people might think that looks, pretentious or intentionally like look out art outside him or whatever. But I do like the whole. Well, I guess the idea was that he wanted it to seem like an enclosed box and like in an enclosed space you can't get out of or whatever. But the whole time I was watching it before I read that, the way I was taking it was with like the rounded edges and how it's only in the middle of the screen. It kind of has the look of like a home movie, like a preserved memory. When it's so you have those moments to where all the emotion comes from, to where those moments with Rooney Mara before he dies feel so distant, like they're memories by the time he's a ghost, and how he longs for that when he's just watching her be alone and can't do anything about it. And it's also with the rounded edges, it kind of reminds you of like when you see like really old family albums and you see the pictures that are like on that old white paper that have those rounded edges, where it's kind of like, it looks like maybe an old photograph that's moving. That's the way I took the format, but apparently it's the whole box thing, which I guess I get, because he's in the house most of the time and there's nothing, he has constraints after he's a ghost, I guess. I don't know. So it's not all clear, which I think is probably the point to some degree, but it's also clear he so badly wants to say something with this movie, but it's just coming out in so many different ways that you just, for me personally, I just really didn't know how to take it, or which portion of it I was supposed to take. If the portions were supposed to add up, it's just not doing it for me. So that's pretty much what it is. And like I said, if it felt like it was working more on that emotional level that we get in like the first third, then I could probably get behind it. But it's like, it just seems like it totally abandons everything to go off on some other point, only to come back, but not necessarily in a way that adds up. So that's how I felt about that. So maybe I totally missed some big point or something, but I don't know. Alright, our last movie is going to be Goon, Last of the Enforcers. I saw Goon when it first came out back in 2011. Didn't think much of it. I didn't think it was that funny. I thought there was like a real false sincerity about it. But I didn't dislike it or anything. I remembered a couple of scenes, like the My Brother's Gay scene, or the scene where Allison Pill's crying and he says, "What's wrong? Did you just watch Rudy?" So it's stuff like that. But for the most part, I just didn't care for it. And then it just went out of my mind. And then like 2 years ago, for me at least, it's like everybody started seeing it and falling in love with it. And I was like, what in the fuck? We're talking about the Sean William Scott hockey movie, Goon? That's the movie you all love now? And it's like, okay, that movie got a really big fan base suddenly. And it's like, to each their own. Okay. So eventually, we got this sequel. And Jay Baruchel is directing now. He co-wrote the original with Evan Goldberg. And now he gets to co-write and direct. So, we're just omen right off. The very opening scene of the movie, I was worried. Because we have T.J. Miller doing what he does best, being totally and completely unfunny. Is the opening scene where he's like this sportscaster, and they have this show that he's popping up throughout the movie, and so every now and then T.J. Miller gets to pop up and annoy us with his comedy cemetery, that whatever comes out of his head. Just dead jokes left and right every single time this guy opens his mouth. In between that, we've got a movie. And we have Sean William Scott, who has been put out of commission because he gets the holy shit beat out of him by Wyatt Russell. And so Wyatt Russell becomes his enemy, but then they end up on the same team when he goes back to hockey, but he's also juggling Allison Pill, who is pregnant now. And it's like, is it hockey or is it family? And he's also going to go back, and Liev Schreiber's character is Apollo Creed. Now, remember how Liev Schreiber was his big rival in the first movie? Well, now he's like the one that's training him. I assume they're going for a Rocky Apollo thing here. So there's that. And that's basically the plot. There are the movie's main problem here falls in with the fact that this is not a funny movie at all, and it is trying through its whole runtime. It's trying really hard. I will give it credit. It is trying, for sure. But for almost every single try, there is a fail behind it, or in front of it, whatever you want to say. And a lot of that has to do with, I'm not quite sure Baruchel knows how to juggle this, because this movie seems like it was written by kids that think being random is the height of hilarity, and that every single joke needs to be spelled out. The movie's trying to adopt like its own particular sense of humor by doing this, but everything feels so incredibly forced and so false when it comes out. And that's not just the sincerity this time. It's everything from, this is one of those movies to where, like, it's supposed to be R-rated and for adults, and it's adult humor and all that stuff. But it's got the attention span of an infant, and we're supposed to still find it funny that hot dogs look like penises. That's like a joke in the movie, is that hot dogs look like dicks. We're supposed to take it for that and think it's hilarious, I guess. And the thing here is this kind of juvenile place. Now, you may think, oh, well, maybe that's the point. It's the comedy of it, is that these are grown guys, but they're so juvenile. Well, yeah, if you never saw fucking American Pie and everything after, and that was almost 20 years ago, and this shit's only getting worse as it goes, especially in this, kind of post-Rogan world, to where it's just commonplace now for that to be the plot of an entire movie. And so, we have scenes like, Sean Scott, too. He's bringing it his all here to make this guy as likable as possible, kind of going back and forth between he's incredibly violent, but he's so sweet-natured, too. He's kind of really desperately trying to do that anti-Stifler thing. To, like, really get away, like, as far away from that as he can, but it's just really not coming through. There's, like the moment when, like, I talk about that whole random thing, when he goes to the doctor's office and he's late, because they're getting the ultrasound, and he just stops and he's like, oh, there's a Stegosaurus on the wall. That's my favorite dinosaur. And you realize that's, like, that's like a joke. Like, that's supposed to be funny, that he pointed out that there was a dinosaur on the wall before he went in the room. And this is what the whole movie's sense of humor is like, from beginning to end. And it's like an hour 45. And then in between, you've got this really, like, hardcore violent thing where it's trying to do the whole hockey fights thing and how brutal and bloody they are. And this was the problem with the first movie, too, to where it's like, I think the blood overkill is so incredibly out of place in this movie that's really trying to be sweet about it. And it's like, maybe it's supposed to be contrasting, where it's like, oh, he's supposed to be a really sweet dude, but this is it. But it's like, they really go overboard to where it's like, somebody gets, like, nudged in the face, and they do the slow-mo blood flies out of their mouth thing. And it's like 10 seconds later, this movie's trying to be all friendly and like, oh, family first and happy. And it's supposed to be, oh, we're supposed to relate to him and feel, hope this guy succeeds, hope this guy is happy. And it's like, whoa, you have no idea what the fuck tone is, do you, Jay Baruchel? Just like you don't really know how to juggle what's funny and what isn't, judging by this. There is, and even people that find this kind of stuff funny, I would think are going to be completely worn down by the end of this. To where it's kind of like when you see, like, there are people who love this movie, so the first movie, so they'll probably be totally excited to see this one, and they'll probably be really amped up and ready to laugh at this. So this, in the first half hour or so, this movie is like, you know, has free reign. It can throw any old fucking thing out there, and if people are hyped enough for it, they'll just laugh on principle because, yeah, there's a sequel to Goon, and they're saying stuff that's supposed to be funny. It must be hilarious. But then even those people, I think, as the movie goes on and does not move on from this, it'll be like, yeah, this was funny about an hour ago, but come to think of it, was it ever? And then it's like you see people just really kind of turn. This is what I imagine watching it. People may totally eat it up, and good for them, I guess. But I don't. This isn't. I don't know. And then it feels a lot of the time like people are making like those bad homemade sketches you see on YouTube, to where the big hilarious moment is saying something stupid or something awkward, and then there's just a long silence while characters stare at each other. That's what this is. When it's not the whole, oh, we're just going to say random things because that's funny. We're just going to try to be vulgar for no reason because adult humor. It's that fucking Deadpool symptom to where it's like, you made a movie for fucking 12-year-olds and presented as this big, it's all for adult humor thing, and it's just, no. And there's just gratuitous dick jokes everywhere. Even his teammates. His teammates are all like one joke. Like, each one is their own joke, and then that's all they do through the whole movie. And they keep coming back as if the joke is funny. Like, they really think these jokes are funny. There is a moment at the very end. This movie is not done yet thinking it's hilarious. So they give us a gag reel. And it's like you just watch it with a totally straight face just thinking, yep, that's exactly how I thought this movie was made. It's just the people making it cracking themselves up. Great. And then the very end of the gag reel, right before it fades into the rest of the credits, is Jay Baruchel coming out from behind the camera, headphones still around his neck. He's got his hands above his head, and he's clapping and screams, "I love this movie." He's showing his pride, his commitment to this movie, how much he adores the product he's making. And in any other case, that is commendable. But then I ask you, what is it at the end of this gag reel that made Jay Baruchel come out from behind the camera, throw his hands in the air triumphantly, and say, "I love this movie"? A guy pantomiming jerking off. Does that not say everything you need to know about this movie? Jay Baruchel's such incredible pride for his own masturbation on film for all of us to see, as if we're going to appreciate it the way that he does, or the way the people making it did. And that is just not what comes through on this screen whatsoever. There are some things in there. Wyatt Russell definitely has his dad's charisma. So he brings out like the only life this movie has, the only personality this movie has that's not a complete fucking just. But then you have stuff like the relationship between him and Liev Schreiber, where it's like, okay, I kind of like this, and their back and forth, the way they work together, fine. And then the way his and Alison Pill's relationship works, it's like, you know, fine. It's developed quite well. It tries its best to avoid cliches. But it's like, when they try sincerity, it only works so far. When you have all these idiotic jokes and people just getting the shit beat out of them and blood flying everywhere. And then it's like, the only time this movie succeeds in being funny is when it actually thinks it can be serious and sincere. And it tries to be super serious. I feel like the sport aspect of this movie would be better if the emotion was there, but it's like, after everything before it, it's like, are you fucking serious? Do you really think this is gonna work? Do you really think we're gonna give a shit about anything when you're now trying to be super, super serious about it? After an hour and 40 minutes of lame-ass fucking jokes from beginning to end. And, for me, no. So, that's the problem. Like I said, it just feels like a bunch of failed fucking YouTube sketches. Just that type of sense of humor just rolled into one where it's like friends making themselves laugh. And we say that about stuff like the Apatow movies or whatever, but I mean, it's a really bad level here. I feel like this movie should not have been on screen. This feels like it should be on Jay Baruchel's personal video camera, somewhere in his basement. for him to look at when he, you know, desires the old times. But no, we all have to fucking sit through it now. And it's, well, the people that are going to watch it. And no, it just, hardly any of it works whatsoever. Like I said, some of the character interactions make it okay. And like I said, Wyatt Russell is very game here, so that does make up for some spots, but I mean, and it really also comes through when you look at Baruchel's character. Now that he's in the director's chair, it's like somebody had to have been toning him down in the first movie when he wasn't the one directing it, because I do not remember his character being this fucking obnoxious in the first movie. But I mean, this is fucking way off the deep end, way off the levels of obnoxious. And he's, like I said, it's like he only has like 2 scenes. Like, he's in the first one significantly more, but it's like, I really don't remember the character being like this. And the fact that he has no control over this character, like, he literally just wants to go all out with no control whatsoever, it's no fucking wonder the movie itself has no fucking control over what he thinks is funny and what clearly isn't when he's in the director's chair. So, that's also kind of a thing if you want to bring Stifler back into this. It's kind of like sequel syndrome, where you have a character that's kind of mouthy and kind of obnoxious, and then as the sequels go on, they have to get worse and worse about it and become even more of a caricature of themselves. The Jay Baruchel character here is absolutely unbearable in all of, like, 2 scenes. And it's like, he's even wearing a hat that says fuck across it. Like, just that. And it's like, that just says everything about what he thinks is funny. I eventually learned later, when I saw the rest of it, it says fuck white people. But for the most part, it's just the word fuck on his hat. And it's like, that just says everything about where this movie's sense of humor lies, and the bullshit that it's going to try to convince us is actually funny and or entertaining and or sincere and emotional. Fucking please. So, there we go. You tried Leo Schreiber and Wyatt Russell and Alison Pill, but there's just not a lot to save this movie at all. So, that being said, I think we're done. So, not completely successful sequels. Blade Runner, obviously, very good, but I do think, you know, obviously I'd have a much bigger reaction to if I cared for the first movie, but so, yeah, that's where we're going to leave this. We're going to continue the horror verses, so, I think that's about it. I have no idea if, I saw Owen saying something about scheduling. I don't know what that is. I hope he knows what he's doing, but, you know. So, I think that's going to do it for this. I am doing another Versus for this weekend. I don't know when you will see it, but it will be out there at some point. And then, once again, continue this through October, as I've been saying. So, yes, that's it. We're done.